The morning sun glinted off the crystal-clear water, as 17-year-old Tyler splashed carelessly in what was not his pool. By noon, Karen would be screaming. By evening, 50 teenagers would arrive to find nothing but concrete and crushed dreams. And by midnight, David Martinez would discover that sometimes the quietest neighbors. David Martinez had always prided himself on being reasonable. 23 years of marriage, 2 kids through college, and a mortgage finally paid off, had taught him that most problems could be solved with patience and a calm conversation. But as he stood at his kitchen window at 7:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning, watching his neighbor's teenage son cannonball into his pool, David felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been building pressure for months. The boy's name was Tyler, and he was everything David had never been. At 17, 6 feet 2 inches, broad-shouldered with the kind of effortless confidence that came from never being told no. His bleached hair caught the morning light as he surfaced, whooping with laughter, completely oblivious to the fact that he was trespassing. "Not again," David muttered, his coffee mug trembling slightly in his grip. This was not the first time. It had started 3 months ago, shortly after Karen Rise and her son had moved into the house next door. Small things at first, Tyler cutting through David's yard to reach the street, leaving muddy footprints on the pristine lawn David spent his weekends manicuring. Then Tyler had discovered that David's fence had a loose board, one that could be pushed aside just enough for an athletic teenager to squeeze through. The first time David had found Tyler in his pool, he had been diplomatic. He had waited until the boy climbed out, then approached with a friendly smile. "Hey there, Tyler. Right, I am David, your neighbor. Listen, I do not mind you admiring the pool, but this is private property. I have got liability concerns, you understand?" Tyler had barely looked at him, toweling off his hair with the same casual arrogance he brought to everything. "Oh yes, sure, Mr. D." He had snapped his fingers, pretending to search for the name Martinez. "Right, Martinez? Yes, no problem." But Tyler's eyes had held no apology, only the calculating look of someone already planning his next move. The second time, David had been less friendly. The third time, he had threatened to call Tyler's mother. The fourth time he had called her Karen Hendricks. Karen was 42, recently divorced, and had moved to David's quiet suburban neighborhood, seeking a fresh start for herself and her son. She had honey blonde hair that she touched constantly when she spoke, and a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. When David had knocked on her door that afternoon, she had answered wearing yoga pants and a tank top that suggested she had either just finished working out or was preparing to. "Oh, David," she had said as if they were old friends rather than neighbors who had exchanged maybe a dozen words. "What can I do for you?" "It is about Tyler," David had begun carefully. "He has been using my pool without permission. I have asked him several times to." "Oh, that," Karen had waved her hand dismissively, the gesture somehow managing to make David feel like he was being dramatic. "Tyler mentioned you were a little territorial about your yard." Territorial? The word had stung more than David cared to admit. "Karen, it is not about being territorial, it is about property lines and liability, if he gets hurt." "Tyler is a strong swimmer," she had interrupted, her smile never wavering. "He was on the varsity team back in Denver. Besides, it is just so hot and we do not have a pool." She had let the sentence hang as if David's failure to share his amenities was somehow a character flaw. "That is not really the point. You know what, I will talk to him, but honestly, David, it is summer, kids need to be kids, right?" She had started closing the door, then paused. "By the way, Tyler is having a few friends over next Saturday for his birthday, just a small party. I hope the noise will not be too much trouble." That conversation had been a week ago now. Watching Tyler perform another elaborate dive into water that David paid to heat, clean, and maintain, David felt his reasonable nature finally snapped. He sat down his coffee mug with deliberate care and walked outside. Tyler was floating on his back, eyes closed, earbuds in, completely at peace in someone else's paradise. David stood at the edge of the pool, his shadow falling across the water. "Tyler?" No response. David tried again, louder, "Tyler." The boy's eyes opened lazily, and he treaded water with the kind of casual grace that made David feel ancient at. "Oh hey, Mr. Martinez, beautiful morning, is it not?" The sheer audacity of it took David's breath away. get out of my pool. Tyler's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his ice amusement, maybe challenge. Come on, man, I am not hurting anything, the water is perfect. I said, get out. Look, I get it, you are probably stressed about work or whatever, but maybe we could work something out, like I could do some yard work in exchange for pool privileges. My mother says you are a reasonable guy. David felt heat rising up his neck. Your mother said that? Yes, she thinks you are, what did she call it? Uptight but harmless. The words hit David like a physical blow. Uptight but harmless, is that how his neighbors saw him? The quiet man who mowed his lawn every Saturday, who never complained about late-night parties, who smiled and waved and minded his own business. Tyler, David said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting, get out of my pool right now, or I am calling the police. For the first time, Tyler's cocky expression faltered slightly, but instead of compliance, David saw calculation. Okay, Tyler said, swimming toward the ladder with deliberate slowness, no need to get all crazy about it. As Tyler climbed out, water streaming from his athletic frame, he paused at the top of the ladder and looked David directly in the eye. You know, Mr. Martinez, you might want to consider that fence repair we talked about. Somebody could get hurt climbing through that gap. It was not a suggestion, it was a threat wrapped in false concern, and they both knew it. Tyler gathered his towel and flip-flops, taking his time, making sure David understood that he was leaving because he chose to, not because he had been forced to. As he squeezed through the loose fence board, he called back over his shoulder. Thanks for the swim, neighbor, see you around. David stood there for a long moment after Tyler disappeared, staring at the ripples still disturbing his pool's surface. 3 years of being reasonable, of turning the other cheek, of being the bigger man, and what had it gotten him? A reputation as someone who is uptight but harmless. He thought about Tyler's upcoming party, about 50 teenagers who would undoubtedly think it was hilarious to crash the old man's pool. He thought about Karen's dismissive wave and her breaking glass laugh. He thought about all the times he had bitten his tongue, all the confrontations he had avoided, all the small indignities he had absorbed in the name of keeping the peace. David Martinez had always prided himself on being reasonable, but as he walked back toward his house, his gaze fell on the pool's main drain valve, partially hidden behind a decorative stone near the equipment shed. He had installed the emergency drainage system himself when they had first built the pool back when Sarah was still alive and they dreamed of grandchildren splashing in the shallow end. The valve was designed to empty the entire pool in under 6 hours. David Martinez had always been reasonable, but reasonable men, he was beginning to understand, finished last. And sometimes finishing last meant being forgotten, dismissed, walked over by entitled teenagers and their equally entitled mothers. He checked his watch, 8:15 a.m. Tyler's party was scheduled for 6 p.m. next Saturday. That gave him exactly 6 days to decide. Whether he was going to remain the uptight but harmless neighbor, or whether it was time to remind his new neighbors that still waters run deep, and that some people, when pushed too far, push back with the devastating precision of a man who has nothing left to lose. As David reached for the valve, his phone buzzed with a text message. Karen Hendress, hi David, Tyler told me about this morning, boys will be boys, right? By the way, the party might run a little later than expected Saturday. Hope that is okay, thanks for being so understanding. David stared at the message, at the casual assumption of his compliance, at the emoji that somehow made her entitlement even more infuriating. Then he looked at the valve again, imagining the sound of 20,000 gallons of water rushing away, imagining Tyler and his friends arriving to find nothing but concrete and the harsh reality that actions have consequences. His finger hovered over the valve for one long moment. Then, with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who had finally reached his limit, David Martinez began to turn it counterclockwise. The water started to drain with a sound like a whispered promise of justice. David Martinez had never been a man of impulse. Even now, watching 20,000 gallons of crystal clear water spiral down the drain, he felt oddly calm, methodical. This was not rage, it was mathematics. Tyler had calculated that David was harmless, Karen had calculated that he was manageable. They were about to discover how wrong calculated people could be when they miscalculated the quiet ones. By Monday morning, the pool was empty. David stood at his kitchen window, coffee in hand, admiring his handiwork. The white concrete basin gleamed in the morning sun like a bone picked clean. He had spent Sunday carefully cleaning the pool's surface, removing every leaf, every speck of debris. If Tyler wanted to use his pool for a party, David would make sure it was absolutely pristine. At 7:30 a.m., right on schedule, Tyler squeezed through the loose fence board. David watched with scientific curiosity as the boy rounded the corner and stopped dead. Tyler's mouth fell open, his backpack sliding off his shoulder to hit the ground with a dull thud. For a full 30 seconds he stood motionless, staring at the empty concrete crater where his private swimming hole used to be. Then Tyler pulled out his phone. David could not hear the conversation, but he could read Tyler's body language, the frantic gestures, the pacing, the way he kept pointing at the empty pool as if his mother could see it through the phone. When Tyler finally hung up, he stood there for another minute, running his hands through his bleached hair. Then he looked directly at David's kitchen window. Even from 50 feet away, David could see the realization dawning in Tyler's eyes. This was not an accident, this was not a coincidence, this was war. Tyler walked slowly to the edge of the empty pool, his flip-flops echoing against the concrete. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Real mature, Mr. Martinez, real damn mature." David sipped his coffee and did not respond. Words were Tyler's game. David had chosen a different language entirely. 15 minutes later, Karen Hendricks was at David's front door. She stood on his welcome mat in a floral sundress and strappy sandals, her honey blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, but her smile, that practiced dismissive smile, was nowhere to be found. "David," her voice was tight, "we need to talk." "Good morning, Karen, beautiful day, is it not?" Her eyes narrowed. "Do not play games with me, what did you do to your pool?" "Drained it." David leaned against his doorframe, supremely relaxed. "Routine maintenance, you know how it is, chlorine levels, pH balance, algae prevention, very technical stuff." "Damn," the word cracked like a whip, and David saw a flash of the real Karen Hendricks, the woman beneath the suburban mom veneer. "Tyler's party is in 5 days. Is it? How nice for Tyler." Karen stepped closer, and David caught a whiff of expensive perfume mixed with something sharper, desperation maybe, or barely controlled fury. "Listen to me very carefully, David. Tyler has invited 50 kids to this party. I have already bought the food, hired a DJ, ordered a custom cake. This party is happening. I am sure it will be lovely with the pool." David's eyebrows rose with genuine surprise. "My pool? Karen, I am not sure where you got the idea that Tyler could use my pool for his party. But he has been swimming in it all summer, without permission, which is called trespassing." Karen's perfectly applied makeup could not hide the flush creeping up her neck. "You are being ridiculous. It is water in a hole in the ground. It is not like you were using it." "Actually, I swim every morning at 6 o'clock. Tyler has just been too busy trespassing to notice." The lie came so smoothly that David almost believed it himself. He had not been in the pool since Sarah died 3 years ago, but Karen did not need to know that. "Fine." Karen's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow managed to sound more threatening than screaming. "How much?" "Excuse me." "To refill the pool, to let Tyler have his party? How much do you want?" David pretended to consider this, tilting his head thoughtfully. "You know, Karen, that is a very interesting question. Let me think. 20,000 gallons of water plus chemicals plus heating plus the liability insurance I would need to cover 50 underage kids on my property." He paused, watching hope flicker in her eyes. "I would say about $300,000 should cover it." The hope died instantly. "You son of a bitch now. Now that kind of language is not very neighborly." Karen's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You think you are so clever, do you not, the quiet little man getting his revenge? Well, let me tell you something, Davy G. Marinis, this is not over, not even close." She spun on her heel and stalked back toward her house, her dress swishing with each furious step. David watched her go, noting the way she pulled out her phone before she had even reached her front door. Tuesday brought the first escalation. David discovered it when he went to collect his morning paper. Someone had spray-painted "damn" in bright red letters across his driveway. The paint was still wet, suggesting it had been done sometime after midnight. David studied the graffiti with the same calm interest he had shown Tyler's shock. The letters were uneven, clearly done in haste, Tyler's handiwork most likely, though David supposed it could have been Karen. Either way, it was sloppy, emotional, which meant his strategy was working. He called the power washing service and had the driveway cleaned by noon. Then he installed 2 motion-activated security cameras, one covering the front yard and one covering the pool area. If Tyler wanted to escalate, David would be ready. Wednesday brought round 2. David woke to find his mailbox bashed in, his morning newspaper scattered across his lawn, and every single one of his prized rose bushes cut down to stumps. The destruction was thorough and vicious, clearly the work of someone who wanted to hurt him where it mattered most. Sarah had planted those roses their first year in the house. David had tended them for 24 years through droughts and storms, and the long empty months after the cancer finally won. Now they lay in pieces, their red and pink petals scattered like confetti at a funeral. This time, David felt something other than calm satisfaction. This time, he felt the cold, precise fury of a man who had been pushed beyond strategy into something darker. He cleaned up the destruction without a word, bagging the broken stems and crushed flowers with methodical care. Then, he reviewed the security footage. Tyler's face was clearly visible in the infrared light along with 2 friends David did not recognize. They had worn dark clothes and moved quickly, but they had forgotten about the cameras. Tyler had even looked directly into one of them while swinging a baseball bat at David's mailbox, his face twisted with a grin that was equal parts excitement and malice. David copied the footage to his laptop, then called the police. Officer Janet Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later, a compact woman with tired eyes and the kind of patience that came from dealing with suburban drama on a daily basis. She reviewed the footage with professional detachment, taking notes as Tyler's vandalism played out in high-definition clarity. "Pretty clear-cut case," she said. "Finally, destruction of property, trespassing, vandalism. The kids are looking at some serious charges if you want to press them." "I do." "You sure? Sometimes these neighbor disputes can get out of hand, maybe a conversation." "Officer Rodriguez," David interrupted quietly, "they destroyed plants that my late wife planted 24 years ago. They are not looking for conversation, they are looking for war." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. "Okay, Mr. Martinez, I will go have a talk with the family next door." David watched from his window as Officer Rodriguez knocked on Karen's door. He could not hear the conversation, but he could read the body language, Karen's shock, her frantic gestures, Tyler appearing in the doorway with his cocky smirk disappearing the moment he saw the uniform. 20 minutes later, Officer Rodriguez was back. The mother claims she had no knowledge of her son's activities. She reported the boy, well, let us just say he has got an attitude problem, but he admitted to the vandalism. He will be charged as a juvenile, community service probably, maybe a fine. The mother has agreed to pay for damages and the party. Officer Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "What party?" "Tyler's birthday party this Saturday. I have reason to believe they are planning to trespass on my property as part of it." "Any evidence of that?" David almost mentioned Karen's assumptions about pool access, Tyler's threats about the fence, the weeks of unauthorized swimming, but something held him back, the instinct that told him his real revenge was still coming and he did not want to tip his hand too early. "Just a feeling," he said finally. Officer Rodriguez studied him for a moment. "Mr. Martinez, can I give you some advice? Sometimes the best way to win a war is not to fight it. These people will be gone eventually, kids grow up, families move on, but you have to live with whatever you do next." After she left, David sat in his empty house and thought about her words. She was probably right. The reasonable thing would be to let the justice system handle Tyler, to accept Karen's payment for the roses, to move on with his quiet life. But David Martinez was discovering that he was tired of being reasonable, tired of being the bigger man, tired of being uptight but harmless. Thursday brought a surprise. David was reviewing his security footage from the night before, more habit than necessity now, when he spotted something unexpected. Around 2 a.m. a figure had approached his property. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect summer weather that made people believe in possibilities. The sky was cloudless, the temperature a comfortable 78 degrees, with just enough breeze to keep things pleasant. It was, David thought as he watched the sun climb toward noon. Exactly the kind of day that Tyler Hendricks would have wanted for his 17th birthday party. David had spent the morning in his garage making final preparations. His tools were laid out with military precision: bolt cutters, a cordless drill, zip ties, and a small device he had built years ago for a government contractor, a frequency jammer that could disable cell phone signals within a 100-foot radius. He had never thought he would use it in civilian life, but then again, he had never thought his quiet suburban existence would require tactical planning. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the delivery trucks began arriving at Karen's house. David watched from his living room window as workers unloaded tables, chairs, a professional sound system, and a custom birthday cake that must have cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. Karen supervised with manic energy, her sundress already showing sweat stains despite the mild temperature. She kept glancing toward David's house, her face tight with anxiety. Tyler was nowhere to be seen. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the catering truck arrived, followed by what appeared to be a mobile DJ setup, complete with flashing lights and speakers that looked capable of rattling windows 3 blocks away. David made a note of the decibel level he would need to account for in his calculations. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Karen knocked on his door one final time. She stood on his welcome mat in a different dress, navy blue, more conservative, as if she had chosen her outfit for a funeral rather than a party. Her makeup was perfect, but David could see the tremor in her hands. "David," she said without preamble, "I am begging you, whatever you are planning, please do not do it." "I am not planning anything, Karen. I am simply not allowing unauthorized access to my property. The kids will start arriving in 2 hours. Tyler has been locked in his room all day. He will not talk to me, he will not eat. He knows something is wrong." "Smart boy." Karen's composure cracked. "He is 17 years old, he made mistakes, but he is still just a kid. A kid who committed multiple felonies on my property, a kid whose mother taught him that other people's boundaries do not matter." "I never taught him that." David looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Karen, every time I asked Tyler to stay out of my pool, you made excuses. Every time I tried to establish reasonable boundaries, you dismissed them. You taught him that charm and entitlement could overcome other people's rights. Now he is about to learn that lesson does not work on everyone." Karen stepped closer, and David saw desperation in her eyes. "What do you want? Money? I will pay you whatever you think is fair. An apology? Tyler will apologize. I will make sure of it. Just, please do not ruin this for him." "It is too late for apologies." "It is never too late." David was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "Karen, when Tyler destroyed my wife's roses, did he think about apologies then? When he spray-painted my driveway, was he considering my feelings? When he threatened me about the fence, was he worried about ruining things for me? That is different." "No, it is exactly the same. Tyler made his choices, you made yours, now you both get to live with the consequences." As Karen walked back to her house, David could see her shoulders shaking for a moment. He almost felt sorry for her, almost. At 5:30 p.m., David activated his cell phone jammer and took his position. He had chosen the perfect vantage point, his upstairs bedroom window, which offered a clear view of both Karen's backyard and his own pool area. He had set up a comfortable chair, a cooler with cold drinks, and a pair of binoculars. After 30 years of designing security systems, he knew the value of good surveillance. The first teenagers arrived at 5:45 p.m. They came in groups of 3 and 4 kids with sun-bleached hair and expensive clothes, carrying towels and beach bags. David recognized the type, the popular crowd, the ones who had never been told they could not have something they wanted. They moved with the casual confidence of people who expected the world to accommodate them. Tyler emerged from his house at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening, and for a moment, David felt something like admiration for the boy's ability to perform under pressure. Despite whatever anxiety he had been feeling, Tyler appeared every inch the birthday king: designer swim trunks, perfect hair, $1,000,000 smile. He embraced his friends with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested nothing was wrong, but David could see the tension in Tyler's shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting toward the fence line between the properties. By 6:30 p.m., nearly 40 kids had arrived. The party was in full swing, music thumping, teenagers laughing, the smell of barbecue drifting through the summer air. It looked, David had to admit, like the kind of party Tyler probably deserved to have, the kind of party that might have helped the troubled kid feel normal again, if only for one night. David felt a moment of doubt. Maybe Officer Rodriguez had been right, maybe the reasonable thing was to let this go, to be the bigger man too. Then he remembered Sarah's roses scattered across his lawn like broken dreams. At 6:45 p.m., Tyler made his move. David watched through his binoculars as Tyler gathered a group of about 15 kids, the core crowd, the ones Tyler wanted to impress most. He could see Tyler talking animatedly, gesturing toward the fence, clearly explaining something. Several of the kids looked skeptical, but Tyler's charisma was working its magic. They were nodding, smiling, clearly buying whatever story he was selling. Tyler led the group toward the loose fence board. David had been waiting for this moment. He picked up his cordless drill, checked the zip ties one more time, and headed downstairs. By the time Tyler and his friends squeezed through the fence into David's backyard, David was already in position behind his equipment shed, invisible in the shadows, but with a perfect view of the empty pool. The reaction was everything David had hoped for and more. The first kid through the fence, a blonde girl in a red bikini, stopped so suddenly that the boy behind her crashed into her back. Then she screamed, not a scream of fear, but of pure outrage and disbelief. The sound was like a signal flare, drawing every other teenager to the edge of the empty concrete crater. "What the hell?" someone shouted. "Where is the water? Tyler, what is this?" David watched Tyler's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine: confusion, realization, humiliation, and finally rage. The boy's perfect party host facade cracked like an egg, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "He drained it," Tyler said, his voice barely audible over the growing chorus of complaints. "The old man drained his pool." "You said there was a pool. You said we were having a pool party. I brought my new bikini for this. Tyler, this is so lame." David could see Tyler desperately trying to salvage the situation, his hands moving frantically as he attempted to explain, but the damage was done. The core group, the kids Tyler most wanted to impress, were looking at him with the kind of contempt reserved for people who promise what they cannot deliver. One by one, they began climbing back through the fence. But David was not finished. As the last disappointed teenagers squeezed back into Karen's yard, David emerged from behind the equipment shed. He was carrying his bolt cutters and zip ties, and his face wore the calm expression of a man completing a routine task. Tyler, who had lingered behind his friends, probably hoping to figure out some way to refill the pool, looked up and saw David approaching. "You?" Tyler snarled, all pretense of teenage charm gone. "You damn psychopath." "Language, Tyler, there are children present." David gestured toward the fence where several of Tyler's friends were still visible through the gaps in the boards. "You think you are so clever, do you not? You think you won." David considered this. "I think I solved a problem." Tyler stepped closer, and David could see the boy's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, it looked like Tyler might actually swing at him. David almost wished he would. Assault charges would be a nice addition to the vandalism case. Instead, Tyler did something that surprised David completely. He started to cry, not the angry tears of a frustrated teenager, but the broken sobs of a child who had finally realized that the world was not going to bend to accommodate him. Tyler sank down onto the edge of the empty pool, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "You do not understand," Tyler choked out. "This party? It was supposed to fix things. I was supposed to be cool again, popular again. My father left. My friends think I am a loser. My mother looks at me like I am some kind of disappointment. This was my chance to." He trailed off, gesturing helplessly at the empty concrete hole. David stood there for a moment, bolt cutters in hand, looking down at this broken boy who had caused him so much trouble. For just an instant he saw not Tyler the vandal or Tyler the trespasser, but Tyler the abandoned son, Tyler the scared kid trying to rebuild his shattered world one stolen swim at a time. Then David remembered that Tyler had chosen his methods, had chosen to take what was not his, to destroy what mattered to others, to threaten and intimidate when charm failed. "Tyler," David said quietly, "you want to know why this happened? It is not because I am cruel, it is not because I hate teenagers or because I am some bitter old man. It happened because you never learned that other people matter too." 3 weeks later, David Martinez was floating on his back in crystal clear water, watching clouds drift across a perfect August sky. The pool was full again, the water heated to exactly 82 degrees, the chemical balance precise enough to satisfy a laboratory technician. Everything was as it should be, almost everything. The difference was in the silence. For months, David had grown accustomed to the sounds of unauthorized splashing, of teenage laughter drifting over his fence, of Karen's voice carrying across the yard as she pretended not to notice her son's trespassing. Now his mornings were peaceful in a way they had not been since Tyler Hendricks had first squeezed through that loose fence board. The boy had kept his word about the job. Every morning at 7:30, David watched Tyler walk to the bus stop in his grocery store uniform, khaki pants, polo shirt, name tag pinned slightly crooked. Tyler looked younger in the uniform, less like the confident athlete who had once treated David's pool as his personal recreation center. They had spoken twice since the night of the party. The first time had been the following Monday. Tyler had appeared at David's front door just after sunrise, still in his pajamas, looking like he had not slept in days. "Mr. Martinez," Tyler's voice had been hoarse and uncertain, Could I talk to you for a minute?" David had been surprised to find that his first instinct was not suspicion, but something closer to concern. The cocky teenager was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely lost. "Of course, come in." They had sat at David's kitchen table, Tyler fidgeting with nervous energy, David sipping his morning coffee. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Tyler had cleared his throat. "I wanted to say, I know you probably do not want to hear this, but I am sorry about the roses, about the spray paint, about all of it." David had studied the boy's face, looking for signs of manipulation, but Tyler's eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, and his hands shook slightly as he spoke. "I know sorry does not fix anything," Tyler had continued. "I know it does not bring back your wife's flowers or undo the damage, but I needed you to know that I understand now. What I did was really messed up." "What changed your mind?" David had asked. Tyler had been quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. "Saturday night, after everyone left, my mother and I had this huge fight. She kept trying to make excuses for me, saying you were being cruel, that you should have understood about my father leaving and all that, and I got so angry, not at you, but at her, at myself." Tyler had looked up then, meeting David's eyes for the first time since entering the house. "My whole life, whenever I screwed up, she would fix it, bad grades, she would call the teacher, trouble with coaches, she would blame the system. I never had to face consequences because she always swept in to save me, but Saturday night, seeing those kids look at me like I was this pathetic loser who could not deliver what he promised, that was my consequence, mine, and I earned it." David had refilled his coffee, considering his response. "What are you going to do about it?" "The job is a start. Every penny goes to paying you back like my mother said, but I also want to, I do not know, replace the roses. I know they will not be the same, but—" "Tyler," David's voice had been gentle but firm, "you cannot replace those roses. They were 24 years old. Sarah planted them our first spring in this house. They had history, meaning, what you can do is understand why destroying them was particularly cruel, and make sure you never do anything like that again." Tyler had nodded, tears threatening again. "I understand, I really do, because understanding is not the same as feeling sorry you got caught. I understand that I was treating you like you did not matter, like your feelings and your property and your memories did not count as much as my fun." Tyler had wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I understand that I was being the kind of person I always said I hated." That conversation had lasted another hour, covering everything from Tyler's father's abandonment to his mother's enabling to his own struggle with anger and entitlement. By the end, David had seen glimpses of the young man Tyler might become if he continued down this path of deflection. The second conversation had happened just last week. Tyler had knocked on David's door on Saturday evening, holding a small potted plant, a rose bush, barely 6 inches tall, with a single pink bloom. "I know you said I could not replace your wife's roses," Tyler had said, his words coming out in a rush, "but I have been doing research, and this is a David Austin rose called Heritage. It is supposed to be really hardy and smell amazing when it blooms. I thought maybe you could plant it somewhere new, start a new garden." David had taken the small pot, surprised by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Where did you get this?" "I have been working extra hours, saving up. The lady at the nursery said this variety represents new beginnings. Tyler had shifted uncomfortably. I thought that was appropriate. They had planted the rows together that evening, choosing a spot near David's front porch where it would get morning sun and afternoon shade. Tyler had insisted on doing most of the digging, his young muscles making quick work of the rocky soil. "Mr. Martinez," Tyler had said as they finished, both of them dirty and sweating, "would it be okay if, would you mind if I checked on it sometimes, made sure it is growing okay?" David had looked at Tyler, really looked at him, and seen not the entitled vandal who had made his summer miserable, but a 17-year-old boy trying to rebuild himself from the ground up. "You can check on it," David had said, but Tyler, "Yes, sir, next time you want to come into my yard, you knock on the front door first." "Always, always," Tyler had agreed. Now, floating in his peaceful pool, David thought about the changes he had witnessed in his young neighbor. Tyler's transformation had not been instant or dramatic. There were still moments when the old entitlement flickered in his eyes, still times when David caught him looking longingly at the pool, but the boy was trying and David had to respect that. Karen's transformation had been more complex. For the first week after the party, she had avoided David completely. He would see her hurrying to her car in the mornings, pretending not to notice him collecting his newspaper. When their paths crossed at the mailbox, she would nod stiffly and continue on her way, her jaw tight with barely controlled anger. Then Tyler had started the job, and something in Karen had shifted. David had been weeding his vegetable garden when she had approached him. 10 days after the party, she had looked different, older somehow, with less makeup and clothes that prioritized comfort over impression. "David," she had said without preamble, "I owe you an apology." He had straightened up, surprised. "Tyler told me about your conversation, about taking responsibility." Karen had been quiet for a moment, staring at her hands. "I realized that everything he had been doing, the trespassing, the vandalism, the entitlement had been doing it too, just in different ways." "How so?" "I thought you would just adjust for us. I ignored your concerns. I treated your property like it was somehow partially ours just because we lived next door." Karen had looked up at him then, and David had seen something in her eyes he had never noticed before: realization. "I raised him to think the world owed him something, and when you did not play along, I got angry at you instead of looking at what we had done wrong." They had talked for nearly an hour that afternoon, sitting on David's front porch like actual neighbors. Karen had told him about her divorce, about her struggles with single parenthood, about her fear that Tyler was heading down a dangerous path. David had shared his own stories about Sarah's sickness, about the loneliness of retirement, about his struggle to find purpose in a house full of memories. "I think," Karen had said finally, "Tyler is lucky you are the neighbor he chose to bother. A lot of people would have just called the police and been done with it. I did call the police, but you also gave him a chance to learn from it. That is more than I was doing." Since then, Karen had made efforts to be a better neighbor. She had brought David vegetables from her garden, had offered to collect his mail when he was out of town, had even invited him to a neighborhood barbecue, which he had politely refused, but appreciated nonetheless. More importantly, she had stopped making excuses for Tyler. David had seen this himself just 3 days ago when Tyler had come home from work complaining about his supervisor. "She is such a bad mom," Tyler had said, not realizing David was in his garden nearby. "She makes me do all the worst jobs. And when I try to explain why I should be on register instead of cleaning bathrooms, she just..." "Tyler," Karen's voice had been sharp. "But Mom, you do not understand. I understand that you have been working there for 2 weeks and you are already complaining about doing the job you are being paid to do." David had listened to the next conversation with something like pride. Karen had stayed strong, refusing to support Tyler's complaints, insisting that he needed to prove himself before expecting better work. It was the kind of parenting she should have been doing all along. Tyler had gone inside the house angrily, but he had shown up for work the next morning without further complaint. Now, as David floated in his perfectly maintained pool, he thought about the strange way life had changed. 3 weeks ago, he had been a man filled with quiet anger, planning big revenge.